She was my friend's mom, confident, untouchable, and far beyond the world I knew. But when she smirked and said, "You look so innocent," "I'll fix that," I realized some lessons don't come from books, they come from the people you were never meant to fall for. The first thing I noticed when I stepped into my friend Ryan's house wasn't the smell of coffee or the echo of old laughter, it was the feeling that time had folded back on itself. The same framed photos lined the hallway, the same wooden floors creaked underfoot. But the house wasn't quite the same, and neither was she. Elena, Ryan's mom, appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel, her hair loosely tied back, sunlight slipping through the window and tracing gold along her shoulders. I remembered her as warm and cheerful, the kind of mom who packed extra snacks for the kids in the neighborhood. But now, there was something steadier about her, quieter confidence, softer voice, and eyes that seemed to see through every layer of pretense. "Wow," she said, with a knowing smile, "you've grown up." Though, she tilted her head slightly, her tone dipping into playful teasing, "You still look so innocent." I laughed, maybe too quickly. "Guess some things don't change." Her smirk deepened, subtle but deliberate. "We'll see about that." It wasn't flirtatious, not yet. It was the kind of line that hung in the air a little too long, wrapped in humor but laced with something unspoken. As Ryan came down the stairs, Elena turned back toward the kitchen like nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the echo of her voice, the way it had slid effortlessly between warmth and challenge. There was something magnetic in how she carried herself, everything she did seemed unhurried, purposeful. Even the simple act of pouring juice into a glass felt like a performance of quiet grace. Over lunch, I found myself watching her more than I meant to. The way she laughed softly at Ryan's stories, the way her eyes flicked to me when she thought I wasn't looking. Each glance left behind a trace of awareness I couldn't quite name. It wasn't attraction, not then. It was intrigue. A curiosity that stirred somewhere deep and unfamiliar. When I finally looked up from my plate and met her gaze directly, she didn't look away. Instead, she gave me a look, half amusement, half something unreadable, and said lightly, "You always were the polite one." Her words felt harmless, but her tone carried weight. The air between us shifted, just slightly. For a heartbeat, the noise of the house faded, leaving only that quiet tension, the kind that hides beneath laughter and lingers long after the moment ends. That was the first time I realized, some stories don't begin with grand gestures or fate, they start with a single smirk and the unsettling sense that nothing will be quite the same after. The next morning carried that stillness unique to familiar homes, the faint hum of a ceiling fan, the scent of brewed coffee, and sunlight spilling lazily across tiled floors. Ryan had stepped out early to meet a friend, leaving me alone with Elena. I told myself it was normal, casual, harmless, but my chest still tightened at the thought. When I walked into the kitchen, she was already there, humming softly to some old song on the radio. The sound of running water and clinking dishes filled the space. She looked up as I entered and smiled in that effortless way that made everything else seem a little quieter. "Hungry?" she asked. I nodded. "Can I help?" "You help in the kitchen?" she teased, eyebrows arched. "I can slice fruit," I said defensively, grabbing a knife. She chuckled, low and genuine, and handed me an apple. It was ordinary, almost laughably so. Two people cutting fruit and washing dishes. But something about the moment felt charged in ways I couldn't quite define. The kitchen smelled of citrus and soap, the morning light painted soft halos around her shoulders. Every small sound, her quiet breath, the brush of her sleeve against mine, seemed amplified. When I reached for the bowl, her hand brushed against my wrist. It was the lightest touch, accidental maybe, but it sent a flicker of warmth up my arm. I froze, waiting for her to move her hand away. She didn't, not immediately. Instead, she looked at me with that same teasing calm she'd shown the night before. "You're so careful," she murmured, barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure what to say. The room suddenly felt too small, too bright. She smiled faintly and went back to her task as if nothing had happened, leaving me wondering if I'd imagined it all. Later, as we sat at the table, she asked about my plans, work, college, life, and listened with a quiet attentiveness that made me forget to be nervous. Every now and then, her hand would brush the table near mine, not touching, but close enough to feel. By the time Ryan returned, the kitchen looked the same, but I didn't feel the same. Something subtle had shifted between us, not a line crossed, but a line noticed. That afternoon, when she passed me a plate, her fingers grazed mine once more. She didn't say a word, only smiled that knowing smile. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I felt both comforted and completely undone. The rain began just after sunset, slow, steady, and rhythmic against the roof. Ryan had gone out to meet friends, leaving the house strangely quiet. I wandered into the living room, drawn by the dim glow of a lamp and the faint aroma of coffee. Elena sat by the window, a book in her lap, glasses perched low on her nose. She looked up when I entered. Couldn't sleep. I shook my head, smiling faintly. Too much coffee, maybe. She gestured to the empty chair across from her. Then have another. It won't make a difference now. Her tone was casual, but something about the moment felt heavier. Maybe it was the way the rain muffled the world outside, or the fact that her voice sounded softer than usual, almost thoughtful. I sat down, and for a few quiet seconds, the only sound was rain tapping against the glass. We talked about simple things at first, movies, places we missed, people we hadn't seen in years. But slowly, the conversation drifted to deeper currents. She spoke of how time had a way of taking without asking, how certain dreams faded quietly when no one was watching. Her words weren't sad, but there was a weight behind them, the kind that comes from knowing loss, and learning to live around it. I listened more than I spoke. There was something grounding in her honesty, a kind of vulnerability that didn't ask for sympathy, only understanding. When she smiled again, it was smaller, but real. A low rumble of thunder rolled through the sky. She reached for a shawl draped over the arm of the chair and wrapped it around her shoulders, her fingers trembling slightly from the chill. Cold? I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. A little. Without overthinking, I reached out, not to take her hand, but to steady the edge of the shawl where it slipped off her shoulder. My fingers brushed against the back of her hand, just a second's contact, enough to make both of us pause. Her eyes met mine. The space between us filled with the soft sound of rain, and for that brief heartbeat, it felt like everything else had disappeared, the years between us, the unspoken boundaries, the weight of reason. She broke the silence first, her voice calm again. "You're kind," she said quietly, "and far too easy to read." I smiled, not trusting myself to answer. When I went to bed that night, I could still hear the rain, and beneath it, the echo of her voice, soft and unguarded, carrying something I wasn't sure either of us was ready to name. The morning after the rain felt different. The air in the house was lighter, yet every movement, every glance, carried a quiet awareness neither of us spoke about. I tried convincing myself it was all in my head, that nothing had changed, but the smallest things gave it away. At breakfast, Ryan scrolled through his phone, half listening as Elena poured coffee. When she passed me the cup, her fingers brushed mine, brief, accidental, but deliberate enough to make my pulse skip. I looked up, half expecting her to glance away. She didn't. Her eyes met mine for a fleeting second before she turned to ask Ryan something trivial about his plans for the day. Once Ryan left, the silence that followed felt loaded. I pretended to check messages on my phone, but my focus was elsewhere, on the sound of her footsteps moving through the hallway, the faint clink of dishes being rinsed, the soft hum she made under her breath. When I finally stood up to help, she looked over her shoulder, smiling faintly. "You don't have to hover," she said, voice calm, almost teasing. "Just trying to be useful," I replied, stepping closer. She turned, resting one hand on the counter. The morning light poured through the window, illuminating strands of her hair. There was a beat of stillness between us, too long to be casual, too short to be reckless. "Elena," I began, unsure where the sentence would end, "about last night." She didn't flinch. Her expression softened, though her tone stayed composed. "You worry too much." I exhaled, realizing how tightly I'd been holding my breath. She closed the distance by a fraction, not enough to touch, just enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "We talked," she said quietly, eyes steady on mine. "Nothing more. Don't make it heavier than it was." Her voice was steady, but there was something else there, a tremor beneath control. For a moment, neither of us moved. The scent of her perfume lingered, soft and familiar, and the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence like background music to something neither of us would name. Finally, she smiled, that same restrained, knowing smile. "Go get some air," she said gently. "Before I start thinking you like my company too much." I smiled back, but as I stepped outside, her words followed me. "Before I start thinking you like my company too much." The truth was, I already did. And I wasn't sure if she hadn't noticed, or if she was warning me because she had. That night, sleep refused to come. The house had settled into silence, the kind that only exists when everyone else is deep in dreams. I tried to distract myself with my phone, but even the glow of the screen felt out of place in the calm darkness. Eventually, I gave up and wandered toward the kitchen, drawn by the thought of tea, or maybe just the need to move, to breathe, to think. The kitchen light was already on. Elena stood by the counter, her back to me, pouring hot water into 2 cups. The soft fabric of her robe brushed her wrist as she moved, graceful even in the simplest motion. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked without turning. I smiled faintly. "Guess we're both restless." She handed me a cup, her fingers steady as they brushed mine. Steam rose between us, carrying the scent of mint and something faintly floral. We stood in silence for a while, the quiet not awkward, just full. "It's strange," she said finally, leaning against the counter, "how comfortable silence can be with the right person." Her words caught me off guard, simple, but heavy in meaning. "Yeah," I said softly. "It's different." She looked up at me then, her eyes unreadable. "You've changed," she said after a pause. "You used to be shy. Always careful with your words." "Maybe I still am," I replied. Her lips curved into a faint smile. "No. You're careful with your heart now. That's different." I stared at the tea, unable to look at her for a moment. The warmth from the cup seeped into my palms, grounding me. "And you?" I asked quietly. "Still careful?" For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she set her cup down and exhaled. "I used to be," she said. "But somewhere along the way, I started mistaking caution for safety. They're not the same thing." Her honesty disarmed me. She wasn't trying to sound wise or mysterious, she was simply telling the truth, unguarded. "You remind me of who I used to be," she said, almost to herself. I looked up, meeting her gaze. "And you make me wonder who I could become." Something shifted in the air, a delicate stillness, as if even the night paused to listen. Our hands rested near each other on the counter, not touching but close enough to feel the warmth radiating between them. We didn't move. We didn't need to. The silence said everything words couldn't, the quiet confession of 2 people standing too close to a line neither was willing to cross. When I finally went back to my room, her words echoed softly in my mind, mingling with the scent of mint and rain. The weekend began to fade faster than I expected. By Sunday afternoon, sunlight poured through the windows in wide, drowsy beams, and the house felt quieter, as if it already knew I was leaving. I packed my things slowly, not because I had much to fold, but because every small task gave me an excuse to stay a little longer. Elena knocked softly before stepping into the room. "Need a hand?" she asked, her voice carrying that calm steadiness I'd grown to recognize, the one that always made the air feel still. I think I'm almost done, I said, though my half-folded clothes told another story. She smiled, sitting on the edge of the bed. You always were terrible at packing. There was no teasing edge in her tone this time, only warmth. She reached for a shirt from the pile and began folding it neatly, her hands moving with quiet precision. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The sound of fabric sliding beneath her fingers filled the silence. You don't have to do that, I murmured. I know, she said. I want to. Something in her voice made me look up. She wasn't smiling anymore, at least not the way she usually did. There was softness there, and something else, too, that unspoken understanding we'd both danced around since the rain. Feels strange, I said finally. Leaving. Her gaze lingered on the shirt in her hands before she set it aside. That's how you know something mattered, she replied quietly. When she stood, she moved closer, reaching to adjust the collar of my jacket, a small, simple gesture that felt impossibly intimate. Her fingers brushed the back of my neck, light as a whisper, but the warmth of it spread deeper than I wanted to admit. You're not as innocent as you look, she said, her voice barely above a breath. The smirk was there again, the same one from the first day, but now it carried affection instead of challenge. I met her eyes, my pulse quickening. Maybe you were the reason I stopped being. Her lips curved into a quiet smile, and she dropped her hand, stepping back. Careful, she said softly, you're starting to sound like someone who means it. I wanted to answer, to say that I did, but the words never came. Instead, we just stood there, facing each other in the hush of a fading afternoon. When she finally turned to leave, she paused at the door. Drive safe, she said, her voice steady but eyes glistening faintly. And, thank you. For what? I asked. For reminding me what warmth feels like, she said, then left before I could reply. The day I left, the sky was the color of soft ash, quiet, overcast, the kind of morning that makes goodbyes harder than they need to be. Ryan helped me load my bag into the car, talking about plans to meet up again soon. I nodded, smiled, said all the right things. But my mind wasn't really on the conversation, it was on the house behind him, and the woman I hadn't seen come downstairs yet. When Ryan went back inside to grab something he'd forgotten, the door opened, and there she was. Elena. Her hair was loosely pinned up, a few strands falling freely, her expression calm but unreadable. She walked toward me slowly, the faint scent of jasmine and coffee drifting with her. So, she said softly, heading back to the real world. Guess so, I managed, trying to sound light. She folded her arms, her gaze steady but gentle. You'll do fine there. The silence that followed was heavier than any words could have been. There was so much I wanted to say, about how those few days had changed something inside me, how her kindness had left a mark I couldn't quite name. But every sentence I imagined sounded too big, too clumsy, for a moment like this. I'll miss this place, I said finally. Her lips curved faintly. This place, or the company? It was a question asked like a joke, but her eyes betrayed the truth, she wanted to know, even if she shouldn't. I met her gaze and held it for just a breath too long. Both, I said quietly. A flicker of emotion crossed her face, surprise, maybe sadness, maybe something deeper, and then she smiled, the kind of smile that tries to hide a tremor beneath grace. She stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence even without touch. Take care of that innocent smile, she murmured, voice low, almost affectionate. It suits you. I wanted to answer, to tell her she'd changed the way I saw the world, the way I understood connection, but she'd already turned back toward the house. When the car engine started, she looked up one last time. Our eyes met through the windshield, and she gave a small wave, restrained, final, and somehow full of everything we never said. Hours later, as the road stretched into silence and my phone buzzed with a message, her name appeared on the screen. It was good seeing you. Drive safe. I read it twice, then smiled, not sadly, but softly. Some goodbyes, I realized, don't end anything at all. They simply become a memory you carry, warm, fragile, and quietly unforgettable. If you felt that quiet ache between them, the glances, the restraint, the kind of love that never had to be spoken, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt slow-burn age-gap romance stories. Speech balloon, tell me in the comments, would you have said goodbye, or stayed for one more cup of tea? Every story here is about emotion, timing, and the moments that change us, even when we never see them coming. Stay tuned for the next story, where love once again hides in the silence between words.